Milarepa was a young man that lived a life that was not virtuous. He went about lying and stealing and even murdering. He spared none from his angry tongue, which sliced his fellow men to the bone, with his rough words that spoke in low ways, that sent them to feel ashamed and heated with anger. He lived like a man that was not in honesty in the least, and he did not stop for a long time this kind of behavior, even though his world was in ruins and ashes, a life that could not be rebuilt easily or made to be set on a good foundation again due to his actions. He lived this way for many a day and dark night, and his soul was very consumed with hate and ill feelings. He did not have a friend on the earth. He did not have a soul that trusted him. He lived alone in a barren place in the foothills of India, and hid his soul from the light, because he was a man that was prideful, and was not to begin to question himself. Until one day, when he was walking along, and saw a sage that was doing Siddha Yoga with fire. This fire appeared out of nowhere, and lit up the space they both sat. And Milarepa's eyes grew wide, and he thought, "Wow, this is amazing, and seems to be out of the ordinary. There must be some other force working that moves things of the heavens and earth." And he sat with this a while, and then walked on, until he came across another sage that was sitting in the forest. This being was absorbed in himself and glowed fully. He did not seem of this world, in the way of being caught up in thoughts of past and future or of himself, but empty it seemed. So Milarepa sat down and stayed a long time by him, until the sage finally came out of it and said, "Young man, you are here because you have done wrong. You have been within evil, destructive ways, and now seek to know something other. This is very sad that you have been destructive to life in the way you have. You have a great debt to pay the universe for this reign of violence and sorrow you have left in your wake. You will repay the universe by building a great structure for any that want to stay. This is what you will do, so go and do it." Milarepa was caught very off guard by this, and he said, "You want me to go build a structure with nothing? No tools, no study, no labor, only me?" "This is what I said to you," spoke the sage. "Now go, and do not say another word, or you will be made to be out of my sight for all of this life and then some." Milarepa shook in himself when the sage said he would be banished from his presence if he did not obey his words. He shook terribly inside at the daunting task before him, but he knew in himself that he was in dire straits as far as choices now, for he could return to his former life and be a recluse, sought out by those that he harmed and eventually killed or tortured. Or he could do what the sage told him to do, which seemed to him now equally hard. But maybe there would be a different outcome at the end. So he stood up, with nothing but his body and thin clothes he was wearing, and walked away into the heat of the afternoon sun, with this great task before him, looming heavy and seeming impossible. He slept on the ground in the hot air, with bugs and ants and mosquitoes pestering him continuously, and dreamed of a great gate that was open in the night air, very still looking on the other side, yet so very dark and unknown to him. He was compelled to look and go closer, and when he did, he came up to the bars, and they were hot to his hands and burned him badly and scorched his skin to the bone, and he shook inside. And then he walked through, and found that he was in a place of great rest and peace and joy, and he felt like he was not as he was, just within deep stillness. He looked behind him, and the gate was gone from his sight. And then he woke up to the nightmare of his life and said, I wish that I could return there instead, for I am now a man that is powerless over what is before me to do. I have no way of understanding what is happening, nor do I know how I will go about this task, nor do I know if I will complete it, nor do I know what will happen if I do complete it, and I do not know anything at all, thought he. I am stripped of my understanding of what is to come. Oh dear, he said, and sat, and thought, and thought. When the sun came up, he walked on into the vast land so hot and dry, so to the bone it set deep in, and he was parched with thirst. He found a few sticks and began to build a foundation for a house, and he found a few more, and a few more, and then he found a few rocks and some earth, and then he found a bit of water in a sunken place in the earth that had contained some rain from a few days back. And he soaked his clothes and wrung out the water onto the earth, and patted it dry, and kept on like this, and kept on. Until there was a little room built that seemed to resemble the coming together of a house. He slept in it and got up and continued. He ate berries and dry earth and leaves that he found. He was emaciated and parched and kept going. Then he felt finally that maybe he was done with his task, and he sat back and looked. And yes, it did look a bit like a house, he thought. Okay, so I will go back and tell the sage about it, and he will say, Good job, son. You are now done and on your way. And he returned to the sage that was sitting in quietude and said, Dear sir, I have finished the task you gave me. Now what am I to do? Would you like to see it? And the sage did not even open his eyes and said, No, tear it down now. Milarepa was floored and said, What? Tear it down, said the sage, and do not speak to me again, or I will have you out of my life for all eternity. I will not want to look upon you ever again. Now go. Milarepa went off on his way completely floored and exhausted, looking like skin and bones and dry flesh that was wasting away. He went back to the house he built with his hands and heart, and tore it down, every bit of it. He sat on the dry earth and cried with his head in his hands. He trembled and shook and swore and cursed, and everything that could be said to make him vent his frustration and sorrow he said. He was told by his sage later to build another house and tear it down, and another, and another, and another. And then he was sent to live in solitude by himself, and sit many, many hours in quiet meditation, in the caves where there was not a soul around but himself. And he sat, and he sat, and he sat. Until Milarepa finally broke through his cage of mind, and entered beatitude and undying perfection. He became a light in the very same life that he took lives, by slaughter and dark ways. And he went on to be a very honored yogi for humanity, with his bright words that rested in stillness, and pointed always to the importance of surrender to Guru and steady efforts. He was very much of an example of a man that pulled himself out of the debris of his dark past and rose above it as a light, to be seen then as a blessing for all that came near him.